Hey everyone, another episode of Restored Justice. Great to be here with you, Bruce. And Kevin's joining us right now. It's going to be Bruce. Why don't we just kick off this episode with an introduction of Kevin? Tell us who he is. And then I'm going to ask you to set this episode up also with the context of today we're looking at the story of the Levite. And I'm curious, as you've thought about it, why is there that character there? And what's a modern day version of that? Kind of set that up for us once you've introduced Kevin. And then Kevin, I got an opening question for you. Bruce?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So Kevin is a wonderful attorney. I know a lot of people listening may not think that those two words go together, but they do. And so he volunteers at our centers. He serves on the Board of Administer Justice, just as a heart for service in the community, and a lot of attorneys do. So Kevin is certainly one of those, and he has great insights, writes a wonderful blog that I encourage people to take a look at and to follow him. So look him up on LinkedIn and follow along. Now, as
That's
to
awesome.
the Levite, why a Levite and a
Yeah.
priest, right? They're both kind of in this religious camp. They kind of go together, priests and Levites. So why distinguish? I don't know. I really don't. In the book, Gospel Justice, I equate the priest with busyness that happens to all of us. We talked about that before.
Mm.
I equate the Levite with judgment because the
Okay.
Levites were very, very, very particular to the law. 613 rules that have been created from the Old Testament to the New Testament, in that 400-year time. They came up with 613 rules, and the Levites were very strict with them. It would have included not being able to go near a dead body. I mean, who knows if this injured man was going to die or on the verge of death,
Oh,
and he'd
yeah.
be unclean. Now, I think the Levite of that day, like a lot of us today, use that as kind of excuses. And so today, maybe we'd look at it because Jesus was really literally turning the world upside down by having these two good people be walk on by and miss an opportunity, and this person in a totally different camp, the Samaritan, being the person that stops. And today
Mm.
you could think about like our political parties or a lot of divides that we have in the country, what people think of Christians or what people think of the other. Like you might say the Levite represents a Republican. You might say the Levite represents the Democrat. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that now suddenly the Samaritan would be the opposite party. And that's
Ah,
Jesus' story. It's really kind of shocking to see that, hey, wait a minute. I thought I was on the right side, like the Levites, but I'm missing an opportunity to serve and I'm judging. He may very well have been judging that man, saying, hey, God allowed this to happen. Who am I to intervene? Uh,
right.
and I think a lot
Or
of
he
us
put
can do
himself
that.
in that situation, right? We
Yeah, he
always
put
have
himself
all
in
our
that
excuses.
situation, any of
Yeah.
that. So I think it's an opportunity to overcome those great divisions that exist between us.
Kevin, what do you think about that concept that there's a little bit of both those characters in all of us? There's a little bit of the priest, there's a little bit of the Levite. As you hear Bruce describe that, what kind of thoughts come to mind for you?
Yeah, absolutely. They were the good and respectable people in the first century in the local community. And I think most people think of themselves as good. And there may have been some legitimate reasons in the first century for a Levite and a priest to have passed by an injured person on the road who could be dead. Bruce already alluded to the fact that that would have made them impure, and they had duties. They had good things that they were about. Their temple duties, and if they were impure, they couldn't do those things. And out of caution, they may have gone to the other side of the road and avoided the body. Of course, the point is that sometimes our goodness and the good things that we do and the busyness that we have and the duties that we're going about in our daily lives get in the way of doing what God actually wants us to do,
Hmm.
and the important things in life, which are people and not necessarily those good things and those things that keep us busy.
That's so true. Bruce, could we extend that past just ourselves individually to even the church at large being kind of judgmental and picking sides or picking communities or picking who they consider worthy of serving and not? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that more. So there's a wonderful workout by Russell Moore, many people may know, and some others called After the Party. It's a new work for churches to try to say go beyond parties, try to go beyond this partisan lines that we've created to see people as people. What Kevin just said, building on what he said, right? maybe they were doing good things, but they missed an opportunity to serve a person, a child of God who needed help. And sometimes we get in our bubbles and we get in almost holy wars, and we do otherify, other people. It doesn't matter what camp those individuals are in. And the sad thing is that to the outside world, now the most recent studies are all showing people, especially in the younger generation, below 35, think of the church as being very judgmental. In fact, one of the most recent large studies said that people ages 16 to 29, nearly 90% believe the church was too judgmental. That's dangerous for the future of the church if we don't start changing that narrative by watching how we're communicating on social media, by watching how we're even communicating within a church, because we really are not about parties. We are about people, and we are about the kingdom of God. And how can we come together around those things that should unite us in justice, mercy, and humility, instead of any kind of camp or any kind of judgment against someone?
So in that sense, the easiest thing for a church or an individual to do is go direct into this world of justice that you're inviting people into, because it kind of shatters all those, call them stereotypes or whatever it is, or truths, by saying we will cross the road, or I will, or our church will, we will stop, we will. It's an almost within 24 hours you can turn around the conversation happening in your town about you or your church. Kevin, your thoughts on that? Like, have you, obviously you're actively serving in this environment. Have you noticed any change about the perception people have when they come into a gospel justice center where you're serving, and the way they look at that church compared to how they would have looked at that church a week ago?
Yeah, let's face it. I mean, people are reluctant to step into a church, especially to step into a church with a vulnerable legal issue that they have. And a lot of people are afraid of judgment, legitimately. And that is the first barrier that's crossed when people come in. They are not judged. We are all people. We all have issues. And let's face it, people that are vulnerable have less headroom. If they have an issue in their life, there's less margin for error, and it's magnified because they don't have resources. And a lot of us, every one of us, we have issues in our lives. We have family issues. We have, legal issues that come up, but people with resources have the ability to deal with those without being vulnerable sometimes, because we have knowledge, we have resources, we know people, but people who don't have those resources have nothing. And that barrier of judgment is real, and it's the first thing that comes down when people do take that bold step to come to a church with a need. That wall comes down immediately, and immediately there's a connection between people, because we're all in the same boat at the end of the day.
Bruce, real life, there's probably a real life example of that, right? Usually as we come to an end of one of our episodes, you always have kind of either a story to tell or feedback from someone who went through exactly what Kevin's describing. I was on the outside. I would drive by your church a bunch of times. I chose not to engage for whatever reason. Then there was a need and you had a solution. Then I engaged, and then this thing happened, whatever that was.
Right, Joe. It does happen all the time. We see it every weekend somewhere across the country, and now over 100 locations in 20 states across the country. There are churches that are pushing back against this perception of judgment and are opening their doors on a Saturday morning, inviting people in, just as Kevin described. And as they encounter this team, their whole perspective changes. It's like the least likely. It is like that Samaritan that stops, least likely person, that people in the church would not be judgmental, that they would instead be loving and caring and wrap themselves around this person, regardless of what they're going through, whether it's divorce that's brutal and they feel like there's judgment there, or whether it's a debt that they owe that maybe they feel like, hey, I did make some mistakes, but now I'm in this situation, or a housing situation. So what I love is that oftentimes they'll say exactly what this one woman said, that I think is such a great encapsulation of what we're talking about. She said, I felt accepted and not judged, even though they are faith-based, they are open to all people in need.
How interesting. So, Kevin, as you share your closing thoughts, from what I heard, this person associated herself as either no faith or from a different faith, because she's observing that even though the church was faith-based, they opened their doors to her who wasn't. Are you seeing that much in the work you're doing? And then some closing thoughts and encouragement for those watching to engage in this with us.
Absolutely. Whoever comes in is a person. We have seen Muslims, we've seen atheists, we've seen people that go to church and people that haven't gone to church in a long time, and we treat everyone the same. And that reluctance goes away immediately. And frankly, just being heard sometimes is huge in someone's life. They just to be able to lay it out and to know that you've been heard, and to know that someone is sitting with you and not sitting on the other side from you, but sitting with you in your problem is an enormous blessing to people who are struggling, sometimes very alone, in these issues that they don't know how to wrap their heads around, and they need help.
So we've looked at the Levite, and historically we've just looked at him as just an individual walking down. Today we got to kind of look at a little bit of him in us, a little bit of him in our church, and say how much of that is in us, and how do we make ourselves cross the street and do our part and look at what wonderful outcomes come. Kevin, for you as a lawyer, being able to contribute and know that you're building up kingdom inventory, and then for the people receiving the help, the impact that's having on them. Pretty awesome. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Thank you both for being on. Bruce, we'll hear you on our next episode. Everyone else, make it a great day.